We're on the brink of war with China for various reasons. I hope we make it to 2050. The demographics is as I describe it. And by the way, them losing doesn't make us winning. So I think you're in the part of the cycle where you've had the tightening and the dominoes are beginning to fall. And I think that that's going to produce more problems. The most important thing is to have this basic, well-diversified portfolio is important. For over and over again. Maybe I should explain. For about 55 years, I've been a global macro investor, and I learned that many of the things that surprised me never happened in my lifetime before. So when I would see certain things happen that were like that, I would go back in history and study prior periods. Studying, for example, the Great Depression allowed us to anticipate the financial crisis in 2008. Anyway, there are three big things that I observed happening that didn't happen in our lifetimes, but happened during the 1930 to 45 period. And they are the creation of enormous amounts of debt and the printing of money to pay for those debts, and it having its economic effects on inflation and growth. The second is internal conflicts over the largest wealth gaps we had since then, values gaps, and the rise of populism of the right and the left. Those conflicts, again, largest since that 1930 to 45 period. And then the rise of a great power, producing a great powers conflict internationally, with the rise of China as a great power, challenging the United States and with Russia. So the great power conflict, that also is the most that's happened since the Great Depression. So because those three things are happening now, and I didn't study them, I went back and I needed to study the cycles, what's happened over longer periods of time. So I studied the last 500 years because these big cycles take about 75 years, give or take about 50. So, like the rise and decline of the British Empire, the rise and decline of the debt. And that dynamic I shared in the book, and I also shared it in an animated video, which is called The Changing World Order. And that creates a path. Now, it's not just because they repeat in this way, but one can see the cause-effect relationships that are happening. And so that has pretty much transpired according to script. We can get into those pieces, but I'd say those are the three main ones. There were two others that had big effect that I paid more attention to, that I'll mention. One was acts of nature in the form of droughts, floods, and pandemics. They were very disruptive when they happened, killed more people and toppled more empires or orders than others. And then also, of course, over a period of time, there's learning and producing new technologies that raises living standards. It's raised per capita income, life expectancy, and so on. But those five factors transpire in ways that we've seen before to create this big cycle. And it's if we can look at the cause-effect relationships, that's what I want to pass along, because I'm 74 years old and I'm in a phase in my life that I want to pass along the things that are of value. And I think this is an important thing. But yes, it's transpiring. I don't want histrionics, I don't want to overdo it. And I also don't want to just jump to conclusions. My goal here is to show people how the machine works, the cause-effect relationship. So I'm going to answer your question by explaining certain things. The dollar is held by countries in the form of debt. In other words, when you say I'm holding the dollar, you're holding a debt instrument. And when we have a problem with the debt instrument, a few problems with it, holding the debt instruments. Those problems are that, first of all, as a result of what the United States was in the world, the largest trading country, the dominant empire, and so on, there's been a huge accumulation of dollar-denominated debt in dollars, therefore. And there's also been a lot of deficits that had to be funded, which happens by selling dollar-denominated debt, which a lot of foreigners and banks and others bought. And so they have a lot of dollar-denominated debt. Now, if you're a creditor, meaning an owner of dollar-denominated debt, you need to have an interest rate that is high enough to more than compensate you for inflation. And so the production now of a lot more debt and them having a lot of debt, and then also sanctions internationally, which means freezing dollar-denominated debt, all have created a reduction in the demand for dollar-denominated debt. There's also, concerns in the world about some of the things that are going on in the United States, and that's reduced that. As a result of that, you're seeing more transactions take place in other currencies. And if they take place in other currencies, then others want to save in those other currencies because that's how they pay for it. So if you want to save in what you pay for, you save more in it and less in dollars. And so that's the dynamic that is reducing the demand for dollars and dollar debt at the same time as the supply of it keeps coming because we have large deficits. It's a supply-demand issue. That supply-demand issue, by the way, also exists in European currencies. Okay, they have too much debt and they're financed the same way, and Japanese currencies. And so what you're seeing is the movement, all that weight of money and debt is causing prices to go up, inflation. And that's also being worsened by the supply chain deteriorations that are due to the international conflict. So, for example, in the case of, let's say, China and the United States and other countries, as they prepare for the possibility of war, they want to be self-sufficient. And so, as a result, they work on being self-sufficient more than integrated and efficient. And so that dynamic is playing an important role too. Well, I'm going to take all three of those influences and answer it because they're all related. There's a business cycle, or a short-term debt cycle, I call it, that, sort of recession to recession. And the way it works is you have a recession and weak economy, central banks stimulate credit growth. Credit gives you buying power. You go out and buy, the economy picks up, and then that continues until you start to have inflation. Then they tighten monetary policy, and then the economy weakens and it goes into the next recession. Since 1945, when the New World Order began, in other words, we had the currency and also the American World Order beginning in that, we've had 12 and a half of those cycles. They typically last about 7 years, give or take about 3. And so we are now about halfway through this cycle in which they did the stimulation, inflation rises, they tighten monetary policy, and we're in the phase of the cycle where there's going to be then the cracks occurring and the negative impact on economic activity and the like. And it's going to be more difficult than normal because there's so much debt outstanding, and we're, what we just talked about. So that is likely to happen over, let's say, the next year and year and a half, which means that it will take us in through the elections. And what we have is a situation where the second of those influences, the internal conflict influence, is bad, and you have a lot of populism. So populists are people who will fight to win at all cost. They're not compromisers. I will fight and I will win for you, and the rules be damned, compromising be damned. And so you're going to have a political situation in terms of, that kind of environment. It's a bad time for that, but it'll end up paying an impact on the nature of the elections, I think. And then you have the international conflict. We are much closer to a big conflict, a war of sorts, either a sanctions and economic war or even possibly a military war with China. And because of the politics also, that will be pushing its limits too, because there are the one thing that most Americans are united on, and both Democrats and Republicans are united on, is anti-China. And as a result, and they all want a strong man or woman, strong person on that. And so I think you're going to see pushing of the limits there, and that becomes a dangerous set of circumstances. So I think that if we take the next, let's call it 1, 2, 3 years, I think that those are going to be riskier years. It's happened repeatedly. If you're in a war, what you want is the commander and everybody, to goddamn follow the instructions and just do what you're told. And, it's not like we're going to sit there and argue, debate, and so on. So what you see is the breakdowns, and particularly you see the breakdowns in also when they're at odds. There's a lot more to argue about, like now the populists of the left and the populists of the right. And so in the 1930s, you saw 4 democracies become dictatorships, choose to become dictatorships. They had parliaments that chose to become dictatorships. Germany, Italy, Spain, and Japan chose that because in order to fight,